Hey everyone, it's Argonath here from The Right Way, and we've got an article in The Spectator about something that happened in New Zealand a few months ago. Basically, there was a push from the Education Ministry to bring Maori knowledge on the same par as scientific knowledge in the last 3 years of high school, or through high school basically. Um, and then some professors got together, wrote a letter, signed it themselves, saying that yes, Maori knowledge is important for the culture of Maori and so on, but it should not be placed on the same pedestal as science because in many cases Maori knowledge is not science because it hasn't gone through the scientific method and so on. And then basically all the woke liberal academics in New Zealand jumped together, jumped on top of these particular scientists who co-signed this letter and said that they're being racist because of this, and they should be expelled from the Royal Society, all this kind of rubbish. So let's have a look at this article and you'll get a better idea about what's going on if you are not in New Zealand, or if you're in New Zealand and you haven't come across this yet. Before we start, don't forget, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, you're welcome to give it a thumbs down. And if you like my content, please subscribe as well. So this is from Toby Young. Why punish a scientist for defending science? Seems like a pretty good statement to me. As a defender of free speech, I sometimes feel like a man falling through a collapsing building. Just when you think you've finally reached rock bottom, the floor gives way again. This was my sensation last week when I read about the disciplinary investigation of Professor Garth Cooper by the Royal Society of New Zealand. For background, Professor Cooper is about as eminent as you can get in his field. He is a professor of biochemistry and clinical biochemistry at the University of Auckland, where he also leads the Proteomics and Biomedicine Research Group. He's principal investigator in the Maurice Wilkins Centre for Research Excellence for Molecular Biodiscovery, a member of the Endocrine Society USA, and he was elected a Fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences UK in 2013. So it sounds like he's pretty high up there, right? So why is this distinguished scientist at risk of being expelled from New Zealand's most prestigious academic society? And if they do expel him, they will become the laughing stock of the world. Seriously. They've just gone completely woke. Several months ago, he was one of several signatories to a letter to the New Zealand Listener that took issue with a proposal by a government working group that schools should give the same weight to Maori mythology or Maori knowledge as they do to science in the classroom. That is, the Maori understanding of the world, that all living things originated with rangi and papa, the sky mother and sky god for instance, should be presented as just as valid as the theories of Galileo, Newton and Darwin. The authors in the letter in defence of science were careful to say that indigenous knowledge was critical for the preservation and perpetuation of culture and local practices, and plays key roles in management and policy, and should be taught in New Zealand schools, but they drew the line at treating on a par with physics, chemistry and biology in the discovery of empirical universal truths that falls far short of what can define as science itself. That seems to be a particularly succinct and rational statement by these particular sciences. Sure, the Maori knowledge is great for your culture and preservation of your culture, but if it hasn't gone through the scientific method, we can't really call it science, right? In a rational world, this letter would have been regarded as uncontroversial. Surely the argument about whether to teach schoolchildren scientific or religious explanations for the origins of the universe and the ascent of man was settled by the Scopes trial in 1925. Apart from the obvious difficulty of prioritising one religion's viewpoint in an ethnically diverse society like New Zealand, what about Christianity, Islam, Hinduism? Yeah, so why are those not given the same priority as Maori knowledge? Is it because that basically say anything against Maori in New Zealand, you're being called a racist? There is no problem that Maori schoolchildren, already among the least privileged in the country, will be at even a greater disadvantage if the teachers patronise them by saying there is no need to learn the rudiments of scientific knowledge. Knowing about rangi and papa won't get you into medical school. So I don't think this is just for Maori children though. This will be for all children if this goes ahead. So they could be spending that time learning about, science rather than Maori cultures and customs and knowledge. Sure, there are certain things about Maori knowledge which do make sense and are based on a little bit of science and so on, and those should be brought forward, but not everything. And it has to have gone through the scientific method, right, to call it science. I mean, that's why we call it science. But the moment the thing was published, all hell broke loose. The views of the authors, who were all professors at Auckland, were denounced by the Royal Society, the New Zealand Association of Scientists, and the Tertiary Education Union. So the TEU, Tertiary Education Union, doesn't even support any of their own members. It's ridiculous. As well as their own Vice-Chancellor, Dawn Freshwater, and a hand-wringing bullying email to all staff at the university said the letter had caused considerable hurt and dismay amongst our staff, students and alumni. Two professors, Cooper's academic colleagues, Dr. Susie Wiles and Dr. Sean Henry, these two are the absolute pits of academics. They've been the forefront of the fear factor of COVID in New Zealand, and I cannot take anything these two people say seriously. Issued an open letter condemning the heretics for causing untold harm and hurt, and said it pointed to major problems with some of our colleagues. Woke white liberals, basically. They invited anyone who agreed with them to add their names to the open letter, and over 2,000 academics duly obliged. Before long, 5 members of the Royal Society complained to an investigatory panel, and an investigatory panel was set up to investigate. The witch-finders disregarded several principles of natural justice in their prosecutorial zeal. For instance, 2 members of the 3-person panel turned out to be signatories of the open letter denouncing Professor Cooper, so they had to be replaced. Did they not mention that at the very beginning when they were appointed to this particular panel? That's ridiculous. In addition, all 5 complainants were anonymous, so when the society asked them to identify themselves, 3 fell by the wayside. They're not even willing to stand up for their convictions. They want to remain anonymous because they don't want to get their name out there, which is utterly disgusting. 2 remained, and the investigation proceeding apace with just 2 people with a newly constituted panel. It's not too late to save the professor. Letters from the members of our Royal Society and any distinguished academics of the sciences and humanities pointing out the absurdity of punishing a scientist for engaging in debate about the validity of science will help. And you can email this person. Remember, the only thing necessary for a triumph of intellectual intolerance is for believers in free speech to do nothing. Exactly correct, right? So, I mean, I'm totally with the original article that Maori knowledge, unless it's being gone through the scientific method, cannot really be regarded as science, but it's important for the culture of the Maori people, and it should be taught that way. So you can teach it on marae, teach it for your parents and so on. It shouldn't have a place in schools. Otherwise, why are we not teaching everything about the Hindu religion and knowledge in Hinduism? Why are we not really teaching the same thing about Buddhism? Why are we not teaching the same thing about Muslim faith? That should be done as well. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments section. Love to read your comments. And again, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, you're welcome to give it a thumbs down. And hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.